When I was unconscious in a hospital bed, trapped inside my own body, I heard my parents make a decision that would follow me for years. They told the doctors not to contact them again. Standing over me, they looked at the machines, the broken bones, the silence, and said there was no point. They believed I wouldn't survive. I couldn't open my eyes. I couldn't move a finger. But I heard everything. I never confronted them when I woke up. I didn't explain that I remembered their words. I didn't reach out at all. I simply disappeared from their lives. 5 years went by. Then one evening, they attended a charity event for families on the brink of losing their homes. Life had worn them down. They looked older, tired, scared. What they didn't know was that I would be the one speaking that night. I stood on that stage healthy, confident, successful, everything they never believed I'd become. When our eyes met, I finally spoke. Not with bitterness, not with revenge, just truth. I told them I was the anonymous donor who had paid off their house. I wasn't raised in a home filled with affection or reassurance. Love wasn't spoken, it was calculated. It came in the form of achievements, discipline, and emotional restraint. My father, Garrick Thorne, a former Marine, ran our house like a drill camp. Every morning followed the same routine, precision, silence, no room for mistakes. To him, failure meant weakness, and weakness was unacceptable. My mother, Elra, was softer in voice but just as distant. She believed feelings were inconveniences. When I got hurt, she didn't comfort me. She handed me something to clean up and expected me to move on. When I was bullied as a teenager, her advice was simple: toughen up. I was their only child, and I carried that weight every day. I tried to be everything they valued: quiet, obedient, accomplished. Still, it never seemed to be enough. In high school, I found refuge in computers. Code followed rules that made sense. It didn't judge me. I built my first app and entered a state competition, earning second place. My father didn't attend. When I showed him the award, he barely glanced at it and told me to come back when I'd won first. That night, I rewrote my code until morning, convinced that if I fixed enough flaws, I could fix the distance between us. After graduation, I left for a university 2 states away. It wasn't prestigious, but it was freedom. I packed alone. My father handed me some cash with a warning not to waste it. My mother nodded goodbye. That was it. I didn't see them again for 4 years. College gave me air to breathe. I stopped living in defense mode. I made real friends. I met Janny, a photography student with a contagious laugh and an unshakable belief in me. When I showed her my startup idea, she didn't question it. She told me it mattered. By senior year, that idea became a small company. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real. A few interns, a cramped office, early investor interest. For the first time, I felt proud of something without needing permission. I rarely contacted my parents. They didn't reach out either. Somewhere along the way, I built my own version of family, people who supported me without conditions. Then, on a stormy night after a networking event, everything changed. A major investor had just told me he wanted to move forward. I stepped outside into the rain, believing my life was finally turning a corner. I called Janny the moment I left the event. I could barely keep my voice steady. We laughed, made plans, talked about celebrating that weekend like the future had already arrived. On the drive home, I chose the longer route, letting the road quiet my thoughts. Rain coated the asphalt, headlights blurred, but I wasn't worried. I was close to home. Minutes away, I never saw the truck stop. It blasted through the intersection at full speed and slammed into the side of my car. The force spun me sideways and sent me straight into a concrete pole. There was no warning, no time to react. One moment I was singing along with the radio, the next, nothing. What came after exists only in fragments. Flashing lights, distant sirens, twisted metal, and then silence. I was unconscious for nearly 3 weeks. Doctors weren't sure if I would ever wake up. My injuries were extensive. Fractures, internal damage, trauma they couldn't fully predict the outcome of. My parents were contacted. They came once. I learned later from a nurse named Devon that they stood beside my bed for less than 10 minutes. When the doctor explained my condition, my father didn't hesitate. He said there was no point in hoping. He said I wasn't built for a fight like this. My mother said nothing. She didn't argue. She didn't stay. They walked out and never came back. What they didn't know, what would stay with me forever, was that I heard them. Somewhere beneath the medication and the darkness, their words reached me. I heard my father dismiss my life as already over. I felt my mother's silence like a door closing. And in that moment, trapped inside my own body, I made a decision. If I survived, I would never again allow them to measure my worth. I would stand on my own, or not at all. Waking up wasn't dramatic. There was no sudden breath, no instant awareness. I opened my eyes slowly, adjusting to dull light and the steady hum of machines. My throat burned. I couldn't speak. My arms felt distant, my legs non-existent. A nurse noticed, leaned over, and smiled with disbelief. She pressed a button and softly said my name, like she didn't want to scare me back into sleep. It took days before my voice returned, weeks before I could sit up without help. Every movement felt like dragging weight through water. My body didn't feel like mine, it felt borrowed, unreliable. The doctors were stunned. They called it unlikely. Some used the word miracle. One of them said, I must have had someone watching over me. But I knew better. No family waited by my side. No parents held my hand. Janae hadn't been told yet. The only people there were the ones whose job it was to be, except Devon. She worked nights. She had a calm presence and a way of speaking that made the room feel less lonely. When things were quiet, she would sit beside my bed and talk to me like I was fully there, even when I couldn't respond much. One night I asked her the question I'd been avoiding. Did my parents come? She hesitated. Then she told me the truth. They had come once. She told me what my father said, how final his voice sounded, how my mother never spoke, how they left without asking questions, without calling back. No follow-ups, no concern, just absence. I stared at the ceiling long after she left, listening to the machines breathe for me, and understood something clearly for the first time. I had survived alone. If you want, I can. Something inside me quietly fractured. It wasn't rage, not yet. It was colder than that. An emptiness that confirmed what I had always known. I was on my own. As the weeks went on, pain became familiar. Physical therapy began, and with it came the truth that I might never walk the same way again. I had to relearn everything, standing, balancing, taking a single step without falling. There were days I wanted to give up. Nights when I locked myself in the bathroom and cried because I couldn't lift myself out of a chair. I told no one I had survived. I posted nothing. I didn't call my parents. I didn't contact Janae. I asked the hospital to restrict my records so no one could get information without my approval. A part of me hoped someone would look for me. No one did. Devon was the only constant. She never treated me like I was damaged. One afternoon, she rolled me outside so I could feel the sun and said, You're not alone, Mason. You're just walking a road most people never see, I asked. Why she kept spending time with me. She smiled and said, Because I know what it's like to survive when no one expected you to. Her words didn't give me hope, but they gave me direction. When I was finally released, I carried a long scar down my left side, walked with a cane, and faced medical bills that felt impossible. I didn't return to the apartment I once shared with Janae. She'd moved out months earlier, leaving a note for the landlord saying she couldn't stay anymore. I rented a small room behind a rehab center, paid for with disability checks and what little savings I had left. I spent every spare hour relearning code. My hands still functioned. My mind still worked. Even if my body was different, I still had something no one could take from me. I rebuilt my software from scratch. I didn't chase funding. I focused on creating something useful, a system that helped people track their recovery progress. A few therapists Devon knew tested it. They shared it with patients. Within a year, hundreds were using it. Grants followed. Then a contract with a large recovery facility. Still, I stayed silent. I didn't forgive my parents. I didn't lash out either. I let them fade into the quiet they had chosen. Their decision had been made in that hospital room. They spoke their truth. I was living mine. Then one headline stopped me cold. Veteran family faces eviction after foreclosure notice. The address was unmistakable, Birch Hollow Drive. I clicked. There they were. My father on the porch of the house I grew up in. My mother beside him, hands clenched together. The article explained everything. Missed payments, medical debt, bad investments, early retirement, no savings. I leaned back and stared at the screen. I didn't feel satisfaction. I remembered him standing over my hospital bed saying I wouldn't survive. Now they were the ones sinking. I closed the laptop and stared out the window. Something had shifted. This wasn't finished. Sleep didn't come easily that night. Seeing them again stirred something sharp. They looked worn down, smaller, like life had finally pressed back. But it didn't feel like justice. It felt heavy. The next morning I reread the article carefully. Nearly a year behind on their mortgage. My father's VA benefits reduced over paperwork issues. My mother working part-time at a laundromat. No family left to turn to. They had applied for community assistance. A local fundraiser had been scheduled to raise what they still owed. Just over $34,000. It could have been anyone. Just another couple fighting to stay afloat. But it wasn't. It was them, the same. People who stood over my hospital bed and walked away. Later that day, I went into the office and sat across from Devon. She'd been there since the start, helping me build the nonprofit we now ran together. She noticed my expression before I spoke. "What's wrong?" she asked. I turned my screen toward her. "That's them," I said. "Those are my parents." She leaned forward, reading, her jaw tightening. "They're losing their house," I nodded. "It's the house I grew up in." Devon stayed quiet for a moment, then leaned back. "You know you don't owe them anything," she said gently. I met her eyes. "I know," she studied me. "Then what are you thinking?" I didn't answer right away. I stared at the photo, my father standing stiff, fists clenched, my mother looking down. Whatever pride they once had was gone. Finally, I said, "I'm not doing this for them. I'm thinking about the kid who stood in that yard wishing they'd see him. I think he deserves to show them who he became." Devon didn't argue. She never did. She simply leaned forward and said, "Then let's do it." That week, we reached out to the fundraiser organizers without revealing our identities. We requested the full breakdown of the foreclosure debt. Then we covered it, every dollar, through the nonprofit. One donor, one transfer. I made sure no names would be released until the public announcement at the gala. We helped people every day. Families crushed by medical bills. Veterans struggling to survive. Single parents pushed out of their homes. Each time it felt like helping a version of myself. This was no different. Still, it carried weight. A week before the event, I drove past the house. It looked smaller than it did in my memory. The paint was worn. The porch sagged. But the wind chimes were still there. The same ones my mother bought years ago at a flea market. I sat in the car for 20 minutes watching the windows. No one stepped outside. No one noticed me. When I told Devon I planned to speak at the fundraiser, she asked if I was sure. "They won't know until I walk on stage," I said. She tilted her head. "Is that the reason?" I paused. "I'm doing it because I'm tired of pretending it didn't hurt. I need to say it where they can hear me. Not to humiliate them. Not to forgive them. Just to say it for myself." She smiled, not softly but proudly. "Then let them hear you." The fundraiser arrived quicker than I expected. It was held in a community hall a few miles from their house. Families filled the room. Local businesses donated food. Volunteers moved between tables. From backstage, I watched my parents walk in. My father wore the same suit he used to wear to church. My mother wore a blue dress I remembered from my graduation. They recognized no one. They sat near the front, hands folded, eyes fixed ahead. They didn't know I was there. Not yet. As the night went on, people shared their stories. Cancer survivors, families saved from eviction, veterans pulled back from nothing. Then the host stepped up and said, "Tonight, we want to acknowledge a donor who gave quietly, but whose impact speaks volumes." That was my cue. I walked onto the stage. The lights weren't overwhelming. I saw them immediately. My mother froze. My father's mouth opened slightly, then tightened. I wrapped my hand around the microphone, took a breath, and began. When I stepped onto that stage, the rest of the room disappeared. The clapping was light and formal, but it barely registered. My focus was fixed on two people seated in the third row. My mother's hands were clenched together in her lap. My father sat rigid, shoulders squared, jaw tight, as if bracing for impact without knowing why. I hadn't seen them in 5 years, not face to face, not since the hospital. At first, they didn't recognize me. I looked different. I stood differently. I didn't limp. I wasn't the son they left unconscious in a bed. I was someone they had never truly known. I lifted the microphone and let a slow breath steady me. "Good evening," I said. "My name is Mason Thorne. I'm the founder of Horizon Hearts, and I'm grateful you're all here tonight." I saw it then. My father's eyes flickered. Recognition hovered, uncertain. My mother's lips parted, then pressed together. Her fingers tightened around her purse as if it were holding her in place. I continued, my voice even. 5 years ago, I was in a car accident that nearly took my life. I spent 21 days in a coma. When I woke up, I had to relearn everything. How to speak, how to walk, how to trust myself again. I paused, letting the room settle. People leaned in. Some nodded. A few familiar faces from our recovery programs were already wiping tears away. I didn't have anyone sitting beside me in that hospital room. No visitors, no calls, no support. And I carried that with me. Not just the physical pain, but the weight of being left behind. My father shifted. My mother stared at me as if I wasn't real. I remember hearing someone say, I wouldn't survive, that I wasn't strong enough. And in that moment I decided that if I did come back, I would never again let anyone define my worth. The room was completely still. I looked straight at them. Tonight, I stand here as the person who made the donation that saved a family's home. A family facing eviction after a lifetime of work. A family who lost their safety net. That gift came from me. A collective gasp moved through the crowd. Heads turned toward my parents. My father's face was unreadable. My mother's eyes filled, but she didn't look away. I gave because I know what it feels like to be alone. To believe no one is coming. I gave because I understand what it means to be left behind. And I gave because I had the power to choose a different ending. I let the silence hold. I didn't do this out of revenge. I didn't do it to shame anyone. Healing isn't about erasing the past, it's about becoming someone who no longer carries its weight. I looked at my mother again. Her hands were shaking. I was raised in a home where strength meant silence and love came with conditions. But recovery taught me something else, that real strength comes from vulnerability. From standing even when no one applauds. From walking forward when everyone else turns away. I stepped back from the microphone. This time the applause rose fully. People standing, clapping with purpose. I didn't look back at my parents as I left the stage. I didn't need to. Backstage, Devon was waiting. She pulled me aside. "Are you okay?" she asked. I nodded. My chest felt tight, but not with pain, with release. I said what I needed to, I told her. She glanced past me. "She's coming." I turned to see my mother approaching slowly, hands folded together, steps unsure. When she reached me, she seemed smaller than I remembered. She tried to speak, then stopped. I raised a hand gently. "You don't have to say anything." Tears spilled over. She nodded. "I'm sorry," she whispered. I met her gaze. "I know." She stepped back. My father never came closer. He watched from where he stood, arms crossed, unmoving. He looked at me once, then away. I didn't expect more. I didn't need it. That moment wasn't for them. It was for me. For the boy who waited in a hospital bed. For the boy who spent years trying to earn worth. For the man who finally understood he already had it. After the fundraiser, I didn't stay long. I thanked people, shook hands, took photos with families our nonprofit had helped, and beneath it all there was a quiet calm I hadn't felt in years. I had spoken my truth, not to hurt, not to humiliate, but to finally step out from the shadow of those who once made me feel unseen. As I stepped outside into the cool night air, Devon walked alongside me. She didn't speak right away. She didn't need to. After a few moments, she asked quietly, "Do you feel lighter?" I thought about it for a second. "I feel free," I said. We got into the car, and as we drove off, I glanced back one last time. My mother stood alone on the steps of the community hall, clutching her coat closed with both hands. My father was already gone. She didn't follow him. A few days later, a letter arrived, handwritten, plain envelope, no return address. I recognized the handwriting instantly. "Mason, I know I don't deserve a reply. I don't even deserve for you to read this. But I need you to know that I heard everything you said that night. And for the first time in my life, I truly listened. I'm sorry I wasn't the mother you needed. I was afraid. Your father was angry. We both failed you in ways I can't undo. Seeing you on that stage, strong, confident, and purposeful, broke something inside me. Maybe it needed to break. I don't expect anything from you. I just needed you to know that I'm proud of the man you became, even though I had no part in it." I folded the letter and placed it in my desk drawer. I didn't respond, not out of anger, But because I had already said what I needed to say, anything else would have been for her, not for me. I focused on the nonprofit. We expanded our work, partnered with new groups, reached more people. Every person who came to us for help reminded me of what it felt like to be forgotten. And every time we helped someone, I reclaimed another part of myself. People often confuse forgiveness with reconciliation. They aren't the same. Forgiveness can simply mean choosing peace over resentment. It can mean walking away without allowing someone to hurt you again. That was the choice I made. I didn't save my parents' home to punish them. I didn't do it to create debt or obligation. I did it because I had become someone I respected. And that person didn't abandon others just because he had once been abandoned. Devin and I talked often about the fundraiser in the weeks that followed. She said she had never witnessed a room fall so silent or a truth spoken so plainly. You could have destroyed them, she said once. But that wouldn't have changed anything, I told her. The strength wasn't in hurting them, it was in standing there at all. Over time, the house on Birch Hollow Drive was repaired. My mother remained there. My father left. I never learned where he went. Maybe to his brother's place upstate. Maybe somewhere he could keep pretending none of it mattered. Sometimes I wondered if he replayed that hospital visit the way I once had. But he never reached out. And I didn't need him to. Years passed. The nonprofit grew into a national organization. We appeared on morning shows. I spoke about recovery, resilience, and rising without bitterness. I never shared the entire story on camera. This isn't a story about being abandoned. It's a story about becoming, about choosing who you are when no one is watching, about getting back up after being left behind and refusing to let that moment define your future. My parents made their choice. I made mine. They released their grip. I held on. They walked away. I stayed standing. They said I wouldn't survive. And I proved them wrong, not with bitterness but with grace. Thank you for listening. If this story meant something to you, if it reminded you of your own strength or made you feel less alone, please like the video so it can reach others who need it. Share it with someone who might need to hear that healing is possible. And if you want more honest stories about resilience, growth, and the truths people carry quietly, subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss what comes next. I'd also love to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever had to let go of someone to find yourself? Your words might help someone else feel seen. Until next time, be gentle with yourself even if others never were. You deserve that. When I was unconscious in a hospital bed, my parents told the doctors not to contact them again. They stood there, looked at my shattered body, and said there was no point, I wouldn't survive. I heard them. I couldn't move or speak, but every word reached me. That moment stayed with me long after I woke up. I never told them I recovered. I didn't call. I didn't message. I didn't ask why. 5 years passed. Then one night, they walked into a fundraiser meant to help families keep their homes. They looked worn down, older, desperate. They had no idea I would be the one on stage. I stood there alive, steady, successful. And when I met their eyes, I finally said the words I had carried for years, not out of anger, but because they needed to hear them. I was the one who saved their home. I wasn't raised in a house where love was spoken. It was measured by grades, trophies, chores completed, and how well emotions were hidden. My father, Garrick Thorne, was a former Marine. Every day began at exactly 6 in the morning. Beds tight, breakfast silent. Failure meant weakness. Weakness wasn't tolerated. My mother, Elra, was quieter but no softer. She believed feelings were distractions. When I scraped my knees, she handed me a damp paper towel and walked away. When I came home crying in 7th grade after being bullied, she told me to toughen up. That was her version of care, or at least that's how I learned to see it. I was their only child. Maybe they believed that meant I should carry the family name better. I tried. I followed every rule. Stood straight, kept my head down, did everything I thought might finally earn their pride. It never felt like enough. In high school, I found computers. Code made sense. It was clean, logical, and never raised its voice. I built my first app during junior year and entered it in a statewide competition. I placed second. My father didn't attend. He said it wasn't his kind of thing. When I came home holding the silver plaque, he looked at it briefly and said, "Tell me when you win first." That night, I stayed awake until 3 in the morning rewriting the code, convincing myself that if I fixed one more problem, Maybe I could fix whatever was broken between us. After graduation, I was accepted to a university 2 states away. It wasn't prestigious, but it was mine. I packed on my own. As I left, my father stood at the door and handed me an envelope with $500. "Don't waste it," he said. "Don't waste it," he said. My mother gave a small nod. That was the last time I saw them for 4 years. College was the first place I could finally breathe. I didn't have to prove myself. I didn't have to prepare for every conversation like it was a test. I made friends. I met Janae, a photography major with a laugh that made everything feel easier. She believed in me before I learned how to believe in myself. I showed her an early version of the startup I was building. She smiled and said, "This is going to change people's lives." By my senior year, I was working on it full-time. A cramped office. 3 interns. Just enough interest from investors to make it feel possible. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't worth millions. But it was mine. I only called home on holidays. They never reached out. Maybe I should have cared more. But I had built something that felt like family. Friends. Mentors. People who wanted me to win without asking me to lose myself. Then came the night everything shattered. Rain poured down hard. I had just left a networking event where, for the first time, a serious investor shook my hand and said, "Let's talk funding." I called Janae, excited. We planned to celebrate that weekend. Driving home, I took the longer route to clear my thoughts. The road was slick. The rain blurred everything, but I didn't think much of it. I was less than 10 minutes from my apartment when a truck ran a red light at full speed. It smashed into the driver's side of my car and spun me into a pole. I don't remember the crash. One moment I was singing with the radio. The next, nothing. What followed was flashes of sirens, twisted metal, and silence. I stayed in a coma for almost 3 weeks. Doctors didn't know if I would wake up. My skull was fractured. My spine was injured. My body was damaged in ways they couldn't promise to fix. My parents were contacted. They came once. I later learned from a nurse named Devin that they stood beside my bed for less than 10 minutes. When the doctor explained my condition, Garrick said there was no point, that I wasn't built for a fight like this. Elra said nothing. They left. They never came back. They never called. What they didn't know, what I would never forget, was that I heard them. Somewhere beneath the trauma and medication, their words reached me. I heard my father say I wasn't strong enough to survive. I felt my mother turn away. And in that moment, I made a promise to myself: if I ever woke up, I would never let them decide my worth again. I would rise without them. Waking from a coma isn't like the movies. There's no dramatic gasp or sudden clarity. I opened my eyes slowly, one at a time, to a room filled with dull light and quiet machines. I couldn't speak. My throat burned from the breathing tube. My arms felt numb. My legs didn't respond at all. A nurse leaned over me, surprised but smiling. She pressed the call button and whispered, "Mason, you're awake." It took a week before I could speak clearly. 2 more before I could sit up by myself. Every movement hurt. My body felt heavy and unfamiliar, like something I was borrowing instead of something I owned. The doctors were stunned. They called it a miracle. I had a fractured spine, broken ribs, a severe concussion, and somehow I survived. One doctor, young with kind eyes, said, "You must have had someone watching over you." But I knew no one had been there. Not my parents. Not Janae. Not anyone from the life I thought I'd built. Only the doctors and nurses whose job it was to show up. Devin was the only one who went beyond that. She was a trauma nurse, probably in her late 30s, with short curls framing her face and a steady, gentle voice that instantly made you feel safe. She worked the night shift, and when things slowed down, she would pull a chair next to my bed and sit with me. One night I finally asked, "Did my parents come?" She looked at me for a long moment before answering. They came once, then she told me everything. How my father spoke to the doctor as if I was already gone. How he said I wasn't strong enough to survive this. How my mother stayed silent. How they left and never came back. No calls, no follow-ups. Just nothing. I stared up at the ceiling as something inside me split open. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was colder than that. Emptier. A quiet confirmation of what I'd always felt. I was alone. As the weeks passed, pain became part of the routine. Physical therapy began, and with it came the realization that I might never walk the same way again. I had to relearn how to stand, how to balance, how to take a single step without falling. There were days I wanted to give up, days I locked myself in the bathroom and cried because I couldn't lift myself out of a chair. I told no one that I had survived. I didn't post online. I didn't call my parents. I didn't reach out to Jenny. I asked the hospital to restrict my information so no one could access it without my consent. A part of me hoped someone would try to find me. No one did. Devon was the only constant. She never spoke to me like I was damaged. One afternoon, she wheeled me outside so I could feel the sun and said, "You're not alone, Mason. You're just standing at the beginning of something most people never have to face." I asked her once, "Why do you keep coming back to sit with me?" She smiled softly. "Because I know what it's like to survive when no one expected you to." Her words didn't give me hope exactly, but they gave me resolve. When I was finally discharged, I left with a long scar along my left side, a cane to help me walk, and crushing medical bills waiting for me. I didn't return to the apartment I had shared with Jenna. She had moved out months earlier, leaving a note with the landlord saying she couldn't keep doing this. Instead, I rented a tiny room behind a physical therapy clinic. I paid for it with a small disability check and the little savings I had left. I spent every free moment relearning how to code. My hands still worked. My mind still worked. And even if my body had changed, I still had something no one could take from me. I rebuilt my software from scratch. I didn't chase investors. I focused on creating a tool to help people track their rehabilitation progress. A few therapists I met through Devon tried it. They shared it with their patients. Within a year, hundreds were using it. Grants followed. Then a contract with a major recovery center. Still, I said nothing to my parents. I didn't forgive them. I didn't confront them either. I simply let them fade into the silence they had chosen. They made their decision in that hospital room. They spoke their truth. I was living mine. Then one day, a headline caught my attention on a local news site. "Veteran family faces eviction after foreclosure notice." The address stopped me cold. Birch Hollow Drive. I clicked. There they were. My father standing on the porch of the house I grew up in. My mother beside him, her hands clasped tightly together. The article explained everything: missed payments, medical debt, bad investments, early retirement, no savings left. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen. I didn't feel satisfaction. I didn't feel revenge. What surfaced instead was the memory of him standing over my hospital bed, saying I wouldn't survive. Now they were the ones sinking. I closed the laptop and looked out the window. Something inside me had shifted. This wasn't finished. I barely slept that night. Seeing their faces again brought something sharp rushing back to the surface. They looked worn down, smaller somehow, like life had finally humbled them the way they once tried to humble me. But it didn't feel satisfying. It didn't feel like justice. It just felt heavy, sad. The next morning I opened the article again and read it slowly, carefully. They were nearly a year behind on their mortgage. My father's VA benefits had been reduced because of unresolved paperwork. My mother was working part-time at a laundromat. They had no family left to lean on. The article said they had applied for a local community assistance program to save their home. A fundraiser was being organized to cover what they still owed. Just over $34,000. It could have been anyone. Just another struggling couple barely holding on. But it wasn't. It was them. The same people who had stood over me and walked away when I was dying. Later that day, I went into my office and sat across from Devon. She had been there from the start, helping me build and run the nonprofit we'd created together. She noticed my expression before I said anything. "What happened?" she asked. I turned the monitor toward her. "That's them. Those are my parents." She leaned closer, reading. Her jaw tightened. "They're losing the house?" I nodded. "The same one I grew up in." Devon stayed quiet for a moment, then leaned back and said calmly, "You know you don't owe them anything." "I know," I said. She looked at me closely. "So what are you thinking?" I didn't answer right away. I stared at the photo of them standing on the porch. My father's hands were clenched into fists. My mother's gaze was fixed on the ground. There was no pride left in either of them. Finally, I spoke. "I'm not thinking about them," I said. "I'm thinking about the kid who used to stand in that front yard, hoping they'd look at him like he mattered. I think that kid deserves to see the man he became." Devon didn't argue. She never did. Instead, she leaned forward and said, Then let's do it. That week we reached out to the fundraiser organizers anonymously. We asked for the complete breakdown of the debts connected to the foreclosure. Then we paid every dollar through the nonprofit. One donor, one transaction. I made sure no names were attached until the public reveal at the gala. Helping people was what we did every day. Families crushed by medical bills, veterans struggling to afford prescriptions, single parents being pushed out of their homes. Every time it felt like I was helping a version of myself. This case wasn't really different. Still, the weight of it stayed with me. A week before the fundraiser, I drove past the house. It looked smaller than it did in my memories. The paint was peeling. The front porch sagged slightly, but the wind chimes were still there, the same ones my mom had bought years ago at a flea market. I sat in my car for 20 minutes watching the windows. No one came outside. No one noticed me. When I told Devin I planned to speak at the event, she asked if I was sure. "They won't know until I walk out," I said. She tilted her head. "Is that why you're doing it?" I thought for a moment. I'm doing it because I'm done pretending that what they did didn't hurt. I need to say it out loud where they can hear it. Not to shame them, not even to forgive them, just to say it for myself. She smiled, not her usual gentle smile, but a proud one. "Then let them hear you." The fundraiser night arrived sooner than I expected. It took place in a community hall just a few miles from the house. Families filled the room. Local businesses provided food. Volunteers moved between tables. From backstage, I watched as my parents entered. My father wore his only suit, the one he used to wear to church. My mother had on a simple blue dress, the same one she wore to my high school graduation. They didn't recognize anyone. They sat near the front, hands folded, eyes fixed ahead. They had no idea I was there, not yet. As the evening continued, people shared their stories. Cancer survivors, families pulled back from eviction, veterans who had climbed out of rock bottom. Then the host stepped up to the microphone and said, "Tonight, we want to recognize one donor in particular, someone who gave quietly, but whose impact speaks volumes." That was my moment. I walked onto the stage. The lights weren't blinding. I could see them immediately. My mother froze. My father's mouth opened slightly, then tightened into a hard line. I held the microphone, took a breath, and began. When I stepped onto that stage, everything else disappeared. The applause was polite and soft, but I didn't register it. My focus was locked on two people sitting in the third row. My mother's hands were clenched tightly in her lap. My father sat rigid, chin raised, jaw set, like he was bracing for something he couldn't name. I hadn't seen them in 5 years. Not face to face. Not since the hospital. They didn't recognize me at first. I wasn't the same. I stood differently. I carried myself with confidence. I no longer limped. I wasn't the son they left unconscious in a hospital bed. I was someone they had never truly known. I steadied myself and let the silence settle before speaking. "Good evening," I said. "My name is Mason Thorne. I'm the founder of Horizon Hearts, and I want to thank you all for being here tonight." I saw my father's eyes flicker. Recognition began to form, though doubt still lingered. My mother's lips parted slightly, then closed. Her fingers tightened around her purse as if it were the only thing, keeping her grounded. I continued, keeping my voice even. 5 years ago, I was in a car accident that nearly took my life. I spent 21 days in a coma. When I woke up, I had to relearn everything. How to speak, how to walk, how to trust my body again. I paused and looked across the room. People leaned forward. Some nodded. A few familiar faces from our recovery programs were already wiping away tears. "I was alone in that hospital room," I said. No visitors, no calls, no support system. And I carried that pain with me. Not just the physical pain, but the pain of being abandoned. My father shifted uncomfortably. My mother stared at me as if she were looking at someone who couldn't possibly be real. "I remember hearing someone say I wouldn't survive," I continued, "that I wasn't strong enough to come back. And in that moment I made a decision. If I ever did come back, I would never again let anyone else decide my worth." The room went completely still. No coughing, no phones, just silence. I took another breath and looked straight at them. "Tonight I stand before you as the person who donated to save a family's home. A family facing eviction after a lifetime of hard work. A family who lost their safety net." I paused. "That donation came from me." Gasps spread through the crowd. A few heads turned toward my parents. My father's face was unreadable, a mask of stone. My mother's eyes glistened, but she didn't blink. I had given because I remembered the emptiness of being alone, the fear that no one was coming. I had given because I knew what it meant to be abandoned. And I had given because, for the first time, I had the power to make a different choice. I let my words linger, not to punish, not to shame, but to speak the truth. Healing wasn't about proving a point. It was about becoming someone who no longer carried that burden. I looked at my mother. Her hands shook slightly. I grew up believing strength meant silence and love came with conditions. Those years of recovery taught me something different. True strength comes from being vulnerable. It comes from standing up even when no one is cheering, from moving forward alone when the world walks away. I stepped back from the microphone, letting my words settle. The applause rose. Not polite claps, but genuine, heartfelt gratitude. I didn't glance back at my parents as I left the stage. I didn't need to. Backstage, Devin was waiting. She pulled me aside and asked, "Are you okay?" My chest felt tight, but not with the old pain. This was release. I had said what needed to be said. Over her shoulder, Devin noticed movement. "She's coming," she said. My mother approached slowly, steps hesitant, hands clasped in front of her as if afraid they might tremble. When she reached me, she seemed smaller than I remembered. She opened her mouth, searching for words. "Mason," I held up a hand. "You don't have to say anything." Tears filled her eyes and she nodded. "I'm sorry," she whispered. I met her gaze, I knew. She stepped back. My father never moved closer. He watched silently, arms crossed, then turned away. I didn't expect more. I didn't need more. This moment wasn't for them, it was for me. For the boy lying in that hospital bed, waiting for acknowledgement. For the boy who spent years trying to be enough. For the man who finally realized he already was. After the fundraiser, I didn't linger. I thanked the organizers, posed for a few photos with families who had received help, and quietly stepped outside. A calmness I hadn't known in years settled over me. I had spoken my truth. Not to retaliate, not to humiliate, but to step out of the shadow of those who once made me feel invisible. As we walked into the cool night, Devin fell into step beside me. She didn't speak for a while, then asked softly, "Do you feel lighter?" I thought about it. "I feel free," I said. Days later, a handwritten letter arrived in a plain envelope. No return address. I recognized her handwriting immediately. "Mason, I don't deserve a reply. I don't even deserve you reading this. But I needed to say I heard every word you said that night. For the first time, I truly listened. I am sorry I wasn't the mother you needed. I was scared. Your father was angry. We failed you in ways I cannot repair. But seeing you strong, proud, and purposeful broke something inside me, and maybe it needed to break. I don't expect anything from you. I only wanted you to know that I am proud of the man you have become." I folded the letter and placed it in my desk drawer. I didn't respond, not out of anger, but because I had already spoken my truth. Anything more would have been for her, not for me. I kept building the nonprofit. Programs expanded, new partnerships formed, and more families found support. Each person who walked through our doors reminded me of what it felt like to be unseen. Every time we helped, I reclaimed a part of myself. Forgiveness doesn't always mean reconciliation. Sometimes it means choosing peace over bitterness, letting someone go without letting them control your life again. That's the path I chose. I didn't save my parents' home to repay them or make them indebted. I did it because I had become someone I could be proud of. The man I worked so hard to be didn't leave others to suffer simply because they once left him. In the weeks after the fundraiser, Devin and I talked about that night. "You could have crushed them," she said once. I shook my head. That wouldn't have changed anything. The strength wasn't in hurting them. It was in showing up at all. The house on Birch Hollow Drive was repaired. My mother stayed. My father moved on, somewhere unknown. Maybe somewhere he could keep pretending the past never happened. I never heard from him again, and I didn't need to. Years went by. Our nonprofit became a national initiative. We were on morning shows. I spoke about resilience, recovery, and rising without resentment. I never shared the full story publicly until now. Because this isn't just a story of abandonment. It's a story of becoming, of choosing who you want to be when no one is watching, of standing up after being left behind and refusing to let it define you. My parents made their choice. I made mine. They let go, I held on. They walked away. I stood tall. They said I wouldn't make it. And I proved them wrong, not with anger, but with grace. Thank you for listening. If this story resonated, if it reminded you of your own strength, share it with someone who needs to hear that healing is possible. And if you want to explore more stories of resilience and truth, subscribe and follow along. Your words might help someone else feel less alone. Be kind to yourself even when others aren't. You deserve that.